Welcome to the final video of Part 8 on sustainable investing. We've covered the market, the strategies, the performance evidence, and the instruments. Now in Part E, we turn to the rules meant to keep this whole industry honest, and to the backlash that has erupted around it. Because for all its growth, sustainable investing has a credibility problem, and its name is greenwashing. Regulators are scrambling to define what sustainable may legally mean, while a loud group of critics argues the entire enterprise is overhyped. Let's look at both. Start with the regulatory response, which in Europe has three main pillars. First, the Sustainable Finance Disclosure Regulation, the SFDR, which we met in Part 5. It classifies investment products into three buckets: Article 6, ordinary products; Article 8, so-called light green products that promote environmental or social characteristics; and Article 9, dark green products with sustainable investment as their actual objective. This gives investors a rough shorthand for how green a fund claims to be. Second, MiFID II, the big European rulebook for investment services, now requires financial advisors to ask their clients about sustainability preferences. So when you get investment advice in Europe, the advisor must now ask whether you care about sustainability and take that into account. Third, ESMA, the European markets regulator, has issued fund naming guidelines that limit when a fund may use words like ESG or sustainable in its name. You can't call a fund sustainable unless a genuine share of its holdings actually is. The common aim across all three is comparability and less greenwashing. To make sustainability claims means something consistent, so investors can compare like with like. There's one crucial misunderstanding to clear up, because even professionals get it wrong. The SFDR was designed as a disclosure regime, not a labeling scheme. Article 8 and Article 9 were meant to describe how a fund discloses, not to be gold stars awarded for greenness. But the market immediately treated them as labels. Article 9 became a marketing badge for the greenest funds you can buy. That mismatch between what the regulation intended and how the market used it is the direct cause of the chaos we're about to see on the next slide. It's a lovely, slightly painful example of how financial markets will turn any classification into a ranking, whether the regulator wanted them to or not. Which brings us squarely to greenwashing. And it's worth being precise because the word covers two quite different problems. The first is deliberate greenwashing, intentional mis-selling, where a firm knowingly overstates its ESG credentials to attract money. This is a mis-selling risk, essentially a form of fraud, and it's what regulators most want to punish. The second is unintentional greenwashing, which is subtler and honestly more pervasive. It arises from vague or inconsistent definitions and from the data and rating noise we discussed earlier. A fund manager can genuinely believe a holding is sustainable, relying on one rating provider, while another provider would flatly disagree. This is a misinterpretation risk rather than deliberate deception, but the effect on the investor can be just as misleading. There's a vivid real-world illustration of how fuzzy all this is. When the SFDR rules bit, a huge wave of funds were quietly downgraded from Article 9, dark green, back to Article 8, light green, over 2022 to 2024, hundreds of billions of euros worth. Not because the funds changed, but because managers got nervous about whether they could actually defend the dark green label. That downgrade wave tells you how unsettled the very definition of sustainable still is. And think about what it meant for an ordinary investor. You might have bought an Article 9 dark green fund in good faith, believing it was the real thing, and then received a letter telling you it had been reclassified to light green, not because anything in the portfolio changed, but because the manager was no longer confident the label could survive regulatory scrutiny. From your seat, the fund is identical. Only the sticker moved. That's the paradox of fighting greenwashing. The very act of tightening the rules exposed just how loosely the word sustainable had been used all along. It's genuinely progress, better an honest downgrade than a maintained illusion. but it's also a public admission that a lot of dark green was never as dark green as it claimed. It's only fair, and good scholarship, to give the skeptics a hearing, and the most prominent is Stuart Kirk. Kirk was a senior executive at HSBC's asset management arm when, in 2022, he gave a provocative talk arguing that climate risk is overblown by markets and the media. His claims, in brief, that hyperbolic apocalyptic rhetoric actually obscures the real issues, that we focus too much on stopping climate change and too little on adapting to it, and that, contrary to the hand-wringing, climate is not priced in, and financial markets will handle it fine. Now, this got him suspended and he later left. But we shouldn't dismiss the argument just because it's uncomfortable. It's a useful provocation. It's a healthy challenge to the sometimes breathless tone of sustainable finance. But, and here's where our own Part C matters. The actual asset pricing evidence is far more nuanced than a flat climate is not priced. Remember Pastor Stambaugh and Taylor and Bolton and Katzperchik. The evidence suggests climate is being priced, at least partially, and the debate is about how much and in which direction, not whether it matters at all. So take Kirk as a valuable corrective against hype, but not as the last word. I actually think his most useful point is the one about adaptation. Much of sustainable finance obsesses over mitigation, cutting emissions, and neglects adaptation, helping the world cope with the warming that's already locked in. That's a fair critique, and it echoes what we saw in the insurance chapter, where adaptation is central. But his headline claim, that climate is not priced in and markets will simply handle it, sits awkwardly against an entire literature showing that climate is, at least partially, being priced in equities, in real estate, and in insurance premiums. The lesson for you as a student is not to pick a tribe. Take the skeptic's discipline, demand evidence, distrust apocalyptic marketing, and apply it to the skeptics too. The truth, as usual, sits between the evangelists and the dismissers, and your job is to hold both to the same standard of proof. Let's draw the whole chapter together with 5 takeaways. 1. Sustainable investing has scaled to tens of trillions of dollars, but its definitions and labels remain genuinely fuzzy. The size depends on who's counting. 2. The strategies run from exclusion to engagement to impact. And it's engagement and additionality that matter most for real-world change. Simply divesting mostly reshuffles ownership. 3. On performance, the theory says green assets should have lower expected returns, and their recent outperformance came from unexpectedly rising climate concerns, so don't extrapolate it. 4. The instruments, green, social, and sustainability-linked bonds, mainly signal commitment. The greenium is small. And 5. Regulation is tightening on greenwashing, while voluntary industry alliances, like the Net Zero Asset Managers Initiative, have proved fragile under political pressure, echoing exactly what we saw with the banks and insurers. If you remember one sentence from this chapter, make it this. Sustainable investing is easy to do on paper and hard to make matter in the real world. And telling the two apart is the whole game. This slide and the next 2 collect the sources, and I genuinely encourage you to read the originals. This first one lists the academic literature, the theory and evidence we built the chapter on, e.g. Pastor, Stambaugh, and Taylor on equilibrium and on dissecting green returns, Pedersen and co-authors on the ESG-efficient frontier, Bolton and Kaczmarczyk on carbon risk. The second reference slide gathers the instruments and frameworks. The ICMA principles for green, social, and sustainability-linked bonds, Flummer on corporate green bonds, and Karpf and Mandel on the green label, the European Union Green Bond Standard, the SFDR, and the EU taxonomy, the theory of responsible investment by Oehmke and Opp, and Burke and van Binsbergen on the impact of impact investing, and Bebchuk and Hurst on the giant passive managers. If you're writing about instruments or regulation, start here. And the third slide lists the data sources. The Global Sustainable Investment Review for the market size figures, the Climate Bonds Initiative for Green Debt Investment Review for the market size figures, the Climate Bonds Initiative for Green Debt Data, and others. To be honest, this slide is bound to be outdated as soon as this video is uploaded, so check your sources for new vendors and data sources when you need them. That brings us to the end of Part 8. We've seen that sustainable investing is huge, sincerely motivated, and genuinely useful, but also fuzzy, oversold in places, and hardest of all where it matters most, changing the real economy. In the next part of the course, we build directly on this to look at sustainable asset management, how these principles are put to work running actual portfolios. Thank you for watching and see you there.